Hey everyone, I know I'm a bit late on creating this video. I've been dealing with problems with my PC, so things have been slow with gaming and creating content, in which I apologize for. With my PC temporarily okay, I could sort of create this video for the meantime. I wanted to completely finish my Final Fantasy mode playthrough before making this, but with how things are with my PC, it seems that I'm running out of time. Although these aren't my final thoughts, I have spent a lot of time in my playthrough to have insight if this really changes up the game. I even played some Ultimaniac difficulty in FF16's arcade mode, so I did take my time on learning, and I'm still learning on these newer difficulty modes. I thought this was important to mention so everyone could have a certain context on how I feel about the game currently. I do also want to mention that this will be spoiler free, or an attempt to be spoiler free, since there may be minor spoilers on gameplay mechanics, icons, and such. I'll do my best to not reveal any big story segments or fights, and we'll show gameplay or out of context clips, but do be aware of the minor spoilers regardless. With all that being settled, I hope everyone finds this video informative and enjoys it. Remember to drop a like to the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Any support to the channel is much appreciated. Now let's get to it. I want to start off by talking about this New Game Plus playthrough. As soon as you complete your first playthrough, you immediately unlock New Game Plus along with Final Fantasy mode. Final Fantasy mode is the hardest difficulty to play for its story or campaign, while Ultimaniac mode is the overall hardest difficulty to play in the game, which is only offered in arcade mode. We will talk about Ultimaniac mode later in this video, but let's talk about New Game Plus first, along with Final Fantasy mode. To be clear on how to play Final Fantasy mode, it's only available in New Game Plus. I did attempt to see if we could play Final Fantasy mode in a whole new game, but it is only provided for New Game Plus. What's different for your New Game Plus playthrough is that everything you earn in your first playthrough, including your icons, is transferred over, and you could continue to upgrade your gear and weapons, while the ultimate weapon is available, which is the strongest weapon to craft in the game and is exclusively in Final Fantasy mode. The enemies are also scaled higher than usual, which they do much damage and have more health. They may have slightly tweaked the AI for this difficulty for them to be much more aggressive, but I could be wrong on that, so please let me know in the comment section down below. Everything else about the game is pretty standard and what you would expect from a New Game Plus. First and foremost, I do want to put out that this should have been the definitive way of playing Final Fantasy XVI on your first playthrough. I wish they had a harder difficulty than the standard ones provided for us, which was story and action focused. The problem with action-focused difficulty is that the mobs and enemies were easy to get through, and you wipe the enemies' bosses like it's nothing. It's why personally I felt the fights in this game weren't enough, because a lot of the fights ended short. There was some fights in the game that did feel enough, like being on hunts or certain main story fights that takes its time, but overall to me there was just not enough. And in my previous video, which was the first impressions of the game, I sort of begged for some gameplay loop than doing side quests or hunts. I wanted more gameplay orientated things to look forward to. With Final Fantasy mode, although it doesn't provide a newly introduced gameplay loop, with how enemies are scaled, things don't end short. Fights seem more satisfying since enemies live longer and actually give punishment to the player if you end up messing up with certain moves. They do big damage to your health, so some moves are actually deadly and give the player the reason to anticipate a dodge or reposition themselves within the area rather than tanking it. I originally thought there was no big difference until I reached the end of the first half of the game, and that's where I felt the difficulty gap coming in. Although I wouldn't say Final Fantasy mode isn't as difficult as I expected it to be, it is still a fun game mode if you are highly into combat. The only downside of this New Game Plus playthrough is that you are going through the whole story again, and yes, you're able to skip cutscenes and even dialogue, but it is still tiresome to even skip because of how much dialogue and scenes exist within this game. Also, I would much prefer them to give an option to skip within a press of a button instead of holding it. Like I said, it gets tiring. I know it sounds such an entitled thing to say, but it feels uncomfortable with the PS5 controller. The positive thing I could say about New Game Plus for its story and dialogue is that you're able to experience the different scenarios, since there are options to say different things or experience different things. It's very surface level though, and it's why I said in my first impressions that the team should have focused on having a similar quest design like The Witcher 3, where you're able to experience and dictate your playthrough with choices you make. They all have an effect in the entirety of the playthrough, which I would have loved to see in Final Fantasy XVI, and it would make sense to have this design since the game is really story driven. Final Fantasy mode is fun, but I don't think there is a big reason to play the game again unless you want more of it, or you're going for the Platinum Trophy. I wish there was another version of Final Fantasy mode for new game, since it is just preferably better to give players choice on what difficulty they would have in this 70-hour playthrough than dictating what players should play. I also think it would be nice to have Final Fantasy mode give enemies and bosses new movesets, or at least have a few to throw off the player, since everyone who is currently playing Final Fantasy mode is used to fighting these certain enemies. Now, Ultimaniac mode. As I mentioned before, I haven't fully experienced everything of it, and I am still learning how to approach it, but I did put in some time to understand most of this game mode. The Ultimaniac difficulty is exclusively in Final Fantasy mode's arcade mode. It's completely different from Final Fantasy mode in that they increase more health and damage for enemies, they increase how aggro these enemies are, so these fights are more hell to go through, and you take about 3 to 5 hits before seeing the death screen. I was quite surprised how this was scaled differently compared to the others. Arcade mode itself makes it challenging with their certain rules they have, since they give you certain equipment. You're able to still use your accessories from the story mode that you've obtained, which you are able to upgrade in the story mode, but for weapons and armor that you grinded for, you're not able to use that. Instead, you use what they give you, which is the certain equipment for that particular level. For Eikons, you would be able to use whatever, but you cannot switch or change them while playing the level. And there's no checkpoints at all when dying. Once you die, you end up back at the beginning. They also give only one potion and one high potion throughout the entire level, unless you find heals within that section. As much as I enjoy this mode and want this difficulty for the story, I do think this mode needs some balancing or fixes. Playing this mode made me realize that the combat isn't as well crafted for mob fights. They are absolutely fun in one-on-one fights or maybe a few enemies within the arena, but when there are multiple enemies present, the auto-lock in this game goes a bit crazy on trying to auto-target every enemy, which ruins the momentum and who you are trying to defeat in combat, which can lead to big punishment considering how aggressive the AI is. It would auto-lock to different enemies that are far away even if you're already near one within a few meters. One of the biggest issues so far in mob fights is targeting the healers. The healers are very aggressive with healing their allies. They would heal them immediately if you try to slay their teammates. So the best thing to do in these mob fights is to go for the healers immediately, but sometimes it is hard to target them or even get close if they are flying, which creates a chaotic mess on you battling the camera. I know some of you may say, why not use the manual lock-on? Well, there is no actual way of switching enemies with the manual lock-on either. Also, it's sometimes weird to use when the camera is angled in a different way. I did try to mess with the lock-on settings, but I saw no big difference in it. So the only efficient way to handle these mob fights is to have these big super AoE attacks that are loaded from your icons. It helps create spacing and does do heavy damage to them. The problem is that you shouldn't have to play a certain way to account for weird gameplay mechanics, and it also encourages the player to constantly spam a lot of super moves since enemies aggro to you immediately. I'm pretty sure you are able to create OP builds once you obtain and upgrade certain accessories, which is why I think this mode is not as balanced correctly. I do think that despite the flaws, it's something to look forward to, especially if you crave for more combat in this game. I would preferably want something out of it when completing it. That would have been a nice touch to do for its challenging content. I believe that there are other ways to approach how Ultimaniac mode is treated, and I do hope certain tweaks or balances, maybe even changes to this game, could help suffice this mode so people can have the incentive to complete them. With both of these game modes that change up the game, depending who you are as a player, it may or may not satisfy you. If you seemingly want a challenge, I think Ultimaniac mode is the way to go. But the downside of this is that you would need to complete your Final Fantasy mode playthrough in order to play all the levels for Ultimaniac mode. Final Fantasy mode can be easy at times, or can be easy majority of the time if you are an experienced player on these type of games, but at least Final Fantasy mode is balanced and provides actual punishment for the player. So, to wrap it up, a lot may ask, does this change the whole game for me? I would say that I am pretty conflicted on where I am with this game and how it treats its gameplay. Gameplay mechanics are marvelous, but how the gameplay levels are designed is a bit weird and also doesn't give big rewards for challenging content. I can see others who crave for more gameplay from this would be a bit disappointed, since it can be a slog to go through the whole story again, and to see how Ultimaniac is handled, it sort of exposed the flaws in the game that really need some fixes. I would say if you genuinely enjoy the gameplay of 16, then go for playing these modes, since they can give a new perspective to you. But if you are hoping for actual fresh content, I would say Ultimaniac mode would be the one to look forward to. But as what I said, you would basically need to play the whole game again to experience all levels of Ultimaniac mode. If you are looking for any sort of fresh story content and not gameplay focused things, unfortunately your journey will end in your first playthrough. With all that being said, I really do hope there is DLC. I feel like this game can be pushed even further and add additional gameplay to whatever they want to add for the game. And I hope they give much more incentives, because grinding the whole game again for just the ultimate weapon is a bit underwhelming to say the least. I still enjoy how this game is, but the problem with this game, and even how Final Fantasy VII Remake, is that the games are very story driven, so it is hard to play again since there's so much dialogue and cutscenes to go through with these crazy perfect games. 16 at least has an arcade mode, which helps the replay value of this game skyrocket compared to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, since you're able to play the levels immediately. But although content is technically present in Final Fantasy 16, there is really not much done with them other than to play them again, which is completely fine. I just expected to have something little from playing it. So I do hope DLC can capitalize on what this game can actually do for its story, gameplay, and other things. The DLC can really turn this around when done right, of course. Now this wraps up our video with our little discussion of the Final Fantasy mode along with its Ultimaniac mode. I thought this was a bit of an interesting topic to talk about, since I am very passionate about 16, and again, I feel like one of my main issues I have with the game is the actual content itself. Story is fine and they could keep it, but it's the content that's provided for us. So I really do hope there could be more, especially, again, I just felt rewards in general and other things, there were moments in the game I just felt underwhelmed with. So I hope DLC could do that if they ever drop it, of course. I want to hear your guys' opinions. I want to give this video a platform to also others, so literally comment down below. I want to hear your guys' thoughts, your opinions, and do you guys actually agree with me, or are we sort of in the same boat? I'm very curious how people really feel. I was very surprised on the feedback on my first impressions, because I'm not saying I was very negative, but I would say I was critical on how 16 is, and that's genuinely how I feel about the game. I don't want to lie to you guys, obviously, and I still love the game as well. So I'm really wondering, since we're I'm not saying we're past the whole honeymoon phase, but I'm pretty sure some people already finished Final Fantasy 16 already. I'm very curious on your guys' thoughts, especially if you're sinking in a lot of time with the gameplay with the higher difficulty modes. I want to hear your guys' opinions on that. So anyway, hope everyone enjoys the video. Remember to drop a like, subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see you guys soon, hopefully, and I need to get this PC fixed. Alright, peace out guys, have a good one.